She said, "I need someone women naturally envy the moment we walk into a room together." Before leaving me for a wealthier, older man her friends approved of immediately. I never tried stopping her. 10 months later, she watched those same friends ask me for career advice while ignoring her completely at the same party. "I need someone women naturally envy the moment we walk into a room together." She said it the way people say things they've been rehearsing alone for weeks. Measured. Practiced. Like the words had been sitting in her throat long enough that she'd stopped feeling guilty about them. I didn't respond right away. I just looked at her, really looked, and understood that she wasn't describing someone she wanted to find. She was describing someone she'd already found. I set my coffee mug down on the kitchen counter. The ceramic clicked against the granite. That small sound felt louder than anything either of us had said in the last 10 minutes. "Okay," I said. That was it. Just okay. She blinked. I think she expected more. Tears, maybe. Or anger. Something she could push against. Instead, I gave her nothing. And nothing turned out to be the one thing she didn't know how to handle. At the time, I thought losing her was the worst thing that could happen to me. I had no idea she'd eventually stand in the same room while her closest friends asked me for career advice and forgot she was there. That conversation didn't come from nowhere. Looking back now, I can trace the exact line from where we started to where we ended, and I can see all the places I noticed something shifting but convinced myself I was wrong. The weeks leading up to that morning had been strange in a way I couldn't articulate. Not loud strange. Quiet strange. The kind of distance that doesn't announce itself. It just accumulates. A few less texts during the day. Dinner where both of us stared at our phones more than each other. Conversations that felt like they were happening through glass. I remember asking her once, maybe 3 weeks before everything ended, if something was bothering her. She said, "I'm fine. I just have a lot on my mind." I accepted that. I shouldn't have, because what she had on her mind had a name, a net worth, and a reservation at a rooftop restaurant she'd mentioned twice that month without ever suggesting we go together. His name was Douglas. I didn't know that yet. I didn't realize it then, but that, "I'm fine," was the last honest thing she said to me for nearly a month. If you enjoy real stories like this, subscribe, because what happened next changed everything for me. Her name was Valerie. We'd been together for years. Met at a networking event in Midtown, the kind of event where everyone's secretly auditioning for something and pretending they're not. She was sharp, funny, the kind of woman who made a room feel smaller in a good way. She had opinions about everything and wasn't afraid to say them out loud. I liked that about her. For a long time, I liked almost everything about her. We moved in together about 18 months in. A 2-bedroom in Brooklyn, more space than we strictly needed, less than we wanted. I was building something at the time. A consulting operation I'd started out of a borrowed conference room and a laptop that overheated every afternoon. It wasn't glamorous. It was the kind of work that looks like very little from the outside while taking everything you have on the inside. Valerie understood that. Or at least, the version of Valerie I met at that networking event understood it. I was 31. She was 29. We were adults who thought we were building something together. Somewhere in the 3rd year, she started wanting something different. I don't think she made a decision, exactly. I think she just started paying attention to a different set of things and stopped paying attention to us. The first sign I noticed and ignored was small. We were at a birthday dinner for her friend Cynthia. Long table, loud restaurant in the West Village, everyone slightly overdressed. There were maybe 14 people there. I knew about half of them. A man named Douglas sat 2 seats down from Valerie on the opposite side of the table. Late 40s. Well-dressed in the way that requires money rather than taste. He laughed at his own stories before he finished telling them, which I found irritating, but he clearly didn't notice and nobody told him. Valerie laughed at those stories too, harder than they deserved. I didn't think much of it at the time. He was a friend of a friend, clearly there because of some peripheral connection to Cynthia's social circle. I noticed Valerie's posture was different around him, straighter, more performative, but I filed it away as nothing. That should have warned me. After dinner, in the cab home, she mentioned him once. "Douglas is interesting. He's in private equity, has places in both the city and Connecticut." I said something neutral. She moved on. I forgot about it within 20 minutes. I wouldn't keep forgetting. The comparison started happening in smaller ways first. Marcus just bought his girlfriend a place in Tribeca. Just bought it. Cash. Marcus was someone she followed on Instagram who we had met exactly once. Cynthia's boyfriend flew her to Copenhagen for a long weekend. Just because. These weren't requests. She was too careful for that. They were observations, dropped into ordinary moments with enough casualness to seem offhand and enough precision to land exactly where she aimed them. I was working, building. I had 2 small clients that had recently turned into 3 medium ones, and I was putting in the hours that kind of growth requires. Our apartment wasn't a showpiece. I drove a 4-year-old car that needed new brakes. My watch was nothing a stranger would notice. None of that had bothered her before. Except, I think, it had started to. "You should come to Cynthia's rooftop thing this weekend," she said one Thursday evening. "There are people there it'd be good for you to meet." I went. I smiled. I shook hands. I talked to a hedge fund manager who spent 40 minutes explaining how most people misunderstood risk, and a woman in real estate who asked what I did 3 times and seemed only mildly more interested each time. Valerie floated through that party like it was an audition she'd been preparing for all month. She was different there, louder, softer somehow at the same time, constantly aware of where she was in the room relative to who was watching. Douglas was at that party. She introduced us. He shook my hand firmly, smiled like he was doing me a favor, and said, "Valerie talks about you." I didn't know what that meant. I didn't ask. I should have understood what that meant. Cynthia was at the center of most of this, though it took me a while to see it clearly. Cynthia had good taste, a decent income, and an absolute obsession with what things looked like from the outside. She'd been Valerie's closest friend since college and had spent the years since quietly curating a life designed for other people's admiration. She married a finance guy, divorced him, kept the apartment and the connections, and emerged somehow more socially elevated than before. She had opinions about everything: men, neighborhoods, restaurants, watches. She offered them like gifts, but they arrived like instructions. I noticed that after Valerie spent a weekend with Cynthia, she always came home subtly recalibrated. A little more restless. A little more critical of small things. The couch we hadn't replaced, the vacation we'd been slow to plan, the way I didn't have strong feelings about getting a table at whatever restaurant everyone was supposed to care about that month. I mentioned this once, carefully. Valerie told me I was being insecure. Maybe she was right. Or maybe I was accurately reading a slow-pressure campaign being run by someone who decided, for reasons of her own, that Valerie could do better. I ignored it at the time. The emotional cheating, and I can only call it that now, looking back, happened in plain sight. She wasn't hiding her phone. She wasn't sneaking around. She was just present with him in a way that required her to be slightly absent from everything else. A brightness that appeared when his name came up. A carefulness about how she described their interactions that told me she'd rehearsed the descriptions in advance. We ran into Douglas at that thing Cynthia hosted. Douglas actually knows the team behind that project, which is funny. Douglas's perspective on this is interesting. He thinks the market's going to shift. Douglas's perspective on my industry, from a man who had never once asked me what I did with any genuine curiosity. I asked her, once directly, "Is something happening with Douglas?" She looked at me with genuine offense. "He's just part of the same social group. You're being paranoid." I let it go. That moment made more sense later. The last month before the end was the strangest. She was present, but somewhere else entirely. Making plans, but not the kind that included me. Coming home later, going quieter, smiling at her phone in the bathroom with the door half closed. I wasn't oblivious. I just wasn't ready to say the thing out loud yet, because saying it out loud meant something I wasn't ready to deal with. I kept working. A 4th client had come through. A referral from someone I'd impressed 8 months earlier. The kind of deal that felt like the first concrete sign that the slow build was actually going somewhere. I came home one night genuinely excited about it and tried to tell her. She listened, said that's great, went back to her phone. That was the night I understood, even if I wouldn't admit it until 3 weeks later. The morning she finally said it, I was already mostly prepared. I need someone women naturally envy the moment we walk into a room together. After I said okay, she waited. I moved around the kitchen, poured the rest of my coffee, rinsed the mug. I was aware of her watching me, confused by my stillness. "That's it," she said. "What would you like me to say?" She exhaled. "I thought you'd want to talk about this. We can talk if you want, but I think you've already made the decision." A pause. "I'm not saying this to hurt you. I know. I just think we want different things. I need someone who matches a certain life. I need the social presence, the status. You're still building, and that's admirable, but I can't wait for someday." That word, admirable. She used it the way people use words to soften blades. "And Douglas matches that life," I said. It wasn't a question. She didn't answer. Which was the answer? "I think you should be with who makes you happy," I said. "I mean that." She seemed thrown by it. I think she expected resistance, something to argue against, a reason to feel justified. My calmness robbed her of that. "You're not even going to fight for this?" she said. And there was something underneath it. Not quite regret, but maybe the first flicker of uncertainty. "Fight how?" I said. "You've already told me what you need. I can't become someone different by the end of this conversation." She looked at me for a long moment. "I think you'll be fine," she said. "I really do." The way she said it was almost kind. Almost. I didn't tell her she was right. I didn't tell her much of anything after that. I just started figuring out what I was taking with me when I left. The logistics of the end were quiet and efficient. I stayed with a friend, Marcus, different Marcus, not the Instagram one, for 2 weeks while we figured out the apartment. She kept it. The lease was in her name, had been since we first moved in, and I had no particular desire to fight over square footage. I found a place in a high-rise in Long Island City, 23rd floor. The kind of view that doesn't mean anything except that you can see a lot of city from one window. I signed the lease on a Tuesday and felt something strange when I handed over the deposit. Not sadness, exactly. More like the particular clarity that comes when a decision has been made and there's nothing left to do but move through it. I didn't tell many people about the breakup. My friend Marcus knew. My colleague Devin knew, mostly because he noticed I seemed different in the office and asked directly. My sister called from Chicago about 2 weeks after, having heard through some grapevine I'd never fully understood, and I told her the short version. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I think I will be," I said. "That's different from yes." "Yeah," I said. "I know." I wasn't performing composure for anyone's benefit. I was just genuinely uncertain. There's a version of losing something you spent 4 years building where the grief is clean and obvious. Then there's the version where you sit in a new apartment on the 23rd floor and realize you're not sure which one of you actually disappeared first. That kind was harder to name. The first few weeks, I put everything into work. Not as a distraction, or not only that. More because the work was the one thing currently in my life that was responding to effort. I'd been building slowly for a couple of years, and I was starting to see the results of that in ways that felt real and measurable. The 4th client had signed. A 5th was in conversation. I'd hired a part-time analyst named Ray, 26 years old and irritatingly good at the parts of the work I found tedious, which meant I could focus on the parts one was actually strong at. I started taking meetings I'd previously been too busy or too hesitant to accept. A senior partner at a firm I'd been trying to get in front of for over a year had finally responded to a follow-up email. His name was Gerald, 50s, careful talker, the kind of person who takes his time arriving at a point because he knows the point is worth waiting for. We met for coffee in the financial district on a cold Wednesday morning, and I expected maybe 45 minutes. We talked for 2.5 hours. By the end of it, he was asking me about capacity, about scale, about whether I'd considered what a different structure might look like for what I was building. He was careful not to make anything explicit. Gerald was not a man who made things explicit before he was ready, but I left that meeting with the distinct sense that something was opening. I didn't tell anyone about it. I'd learned by then that the best things needed time before they could survive being spoken out loud. Meanwhile, I heard things. Not deliberately. I wasn't monitoring anyone. But New York is a city that makes social circles feel smaller than they are, and mutual acquaintances have a way of surfacing information whether you ask for it or not. Cynthia was apparently thrilled about the new development. This I heard from a colleague who knew her peripherally and had no idea why I might find it relevant. She's been going around telling everyone her friend finally made a smart decision. He said, not unkindly, just reporting. Smart decision. Douglas had apparently wasted no time. They were seen at several places within the first few weeks, the kind of restaurants and events that show up in the background of photos Cynthia's type posted on Instagram. He was photographed well. Tall, expensive looking, the kind of man who hired someone to make sure he was photographed well. She looked happy. Or she looked like someone performing happiness for an audience she'd carefully assembled. I noticed the difference because I'd spent 4 years learning how she performed things. I wasn't bitter. Or I was, occasionally, late at night when I was tired and the apartment felt too quiet. But bitterness is expensive and I had other things to spend my energy on. The work kept moving. Gerald introduced me to 2 people at a follow-up dinner 3 weeks after our first meeting. An introduction that was, I understood, a form of endorsement. One of them was a woman named Patricia, early 60s, who ran a small family office and had a way of asking questions that made you feel like every answer was being cataloged for later use. The other was a man named Franklin whose title I couldn't exactly parse, but who seemed to know everyone in 3 different industries. I handled myself well at that dinner. I know that not because anyone said so directly, but because both of them followed up within the week. Patricia asked if I'd be interested in consulting on a restructuring project. Medium-sized company, family-owned, succession challenges. The kind of work I'd done in pieces, but never anchored from the top. I said yes. That project ran for 6 months and changed the shape of what my practice looked like from the outside. More importantly, it changed what I believed about what I was capable of building. Devin noticed the shift before I could see it myself. "You're different," he said one afternoon, not particularly carefully. "Different how? I don't know. Less apologetic about things. Like you used to hedge everything, and now you just say what you think." I hadn't realized I'd been hedging before, but when I thought about it, I recognized something true in what he said. There had been a way I'd operated for a while, maybe longer than the relationship, though the relationship had intensified it, where I was always slightly managing how I came across, keeping my ambitions at a volume other people found comfortable, minimizing things that might seem like showing off. I'd stopped doing that. Not deliberately, just gradually. "Is that good or bad?" I asked Devin. "It's good," he said. "You were a little invisible before, and invisible people don't get the things they're trying to get." About 4 months after the breakup, Cynthia's friend Teresa reached out. Teresa had been part of the same social group. I'd seen her at various events over the years, knew her as a friend of Cynthia's more than a friend of ours, but we'd always gotten along fine. She texted asking if I'd be open to getting coffee sometime. I was mildly curious about the motivation, but agreed. We met at a place in the Flatiron District on a Saturday morning. She was warm, direct in a way I appreciated, and got to the point relatively quickly. "I'm trying to make a change," she said. "Career-wise. I've been in the same role for 4 years, and I feel like I'm circling instead of moving. I heard through someone that you've been doing really interesting work, and I wondered if you'd be willing to talk through some things." I asked who she'd heard it through. She paused just slightly before saying, "Gerald, actually. I know him through my firm. He mentioned your name at a dinner a few weeks ago." Gerald had mentioned my name. At a dinner. To people I didn't know he knew. I kept my expression even. Inside, something quietly registered. We talked for nearly 2 hours. I gave her what I actually thought rather than what was comfortable to say, and she seemed to genuinely appreciate that. By the end, she was thanking me more warmly than the conversation required, and I realized she hadn't been expecting real advice. She'd been expecting the polished, managed version most people offer when they're not sure how much to give. I'd given her the real version. It cost me nothing. It turns out people remember that. I ran into Valerie exactly once during those months. Crossing the street in Soho, maybe 3 months after the breakup. We almost didn't see each other. I was looking at my phone and she was with someone I didn't recognize. When we made eye contact, there was that particular half-second of recognition followed by the social renegotiation that happens when 2 people haven't figured out yet what they're supposed to be to each other. "Hey," she said. "Hey," I said. "How are you?" "Good. Really good." "A beat. You look well." "Thanks. You too." It lasted maybe 45 seconds. She kept moving, and I kept moving, and I didn't think about it much for the rest of the day. I noticed I didn't feel the particular ache I'd expected. More like observing something clearly, the way you observe a building you used to work in after you've moved on to somewhere else. She was with Douglas. That much I had gathered from the way she hadn't introduced the man with her. Absences communicate things. The Patricia project wrapped in early spring, and the results were good enough that she introduced me to 3 more contacts, one of whom turned out to be connected to a development project I'd been peripherally aware of. That introduction led to a conversation that led to a proposal that led, about 6 weeks later, to a contract significant enough that I had to sit with it for a day before I fully believed it. I hired 2 more people, moved the operation into real office space, not huge, but real. The kind where you have a sign on the door and a conference table that doesn't fold up. Ray, my analyst, said when he saw the new space. "Okay, so this is what we were building toward." "This is part of it," I said. "What's the rest?" I didn't have a complete answer yet, but I was less afraid of the question than I used to be. Franklin, the man I'd met through Gerald at that first dinner, invited me to something in late spring. He described it as an industry mixer, which was technically accurate the way calling a Category 4 hurricane a weather event is technically accurate. It was a gathering of about 200 people at a private event space in Tribeca, the kind of room that gets used for things that aren't on the public calendar. Investors, operators, founders, a few people whose exact function in the financial ecosystem was never quite clear, but whose presence was apparently significant. "You should be in these rooms," Franklin said, simply, when he extended the invitation. I'd been in rooms like that before, but as a guest at the edge, introduced by someone else, present by proximity. This was different. Franklin was bringing me in as someone worth meeting, which meant I arrived with a different posture than I'd ever walked into a room like that with before. I didn't engineer that. It just happened as a result of the previous months of work and reputation and being the person people called when they wanted to think something through. I didn't know, walking into that event, what the night would mean. I didn't know she would be there. I saw her about 20 minutes in. She was across the room near the bar, and I registered her before she registered me. She was with Douglas and two other people I didn't recognize. She looked beautiful. She always did in settings like this, had always known how to show up for a room, and she was talking with the slightly heightened energy I recognized as her social performance mode. Douglas was next to her, drink in hand, looking like a man who was accustomed to being the most significant person near him. I didn't approach them, didn't change direction. I was mid-conversation with a woman named Elena, who ran a climate-focused fund and had been asking me increasingly pointed questions about a type of operational consulting I'd been doing. I stayed in that conversation because it was genuinely interesting and because I'd learned not to manage rooms with my attention. The more you chase acknowledgement, the more it retreats. The first thing that happened came about 30 minutes after I'd seen her. Cynthia appeared. I hadn't noticed her before. She was there too, apparently, which meant this was a social circle event, not purely professional, or more likely it was the kind of gathering where the two were indistinguishable. Cynthia spotted me before I spotted her and crossed the room with a warmth that was immediate and specific in a way I found slightly startling. "I've been hoping I'd run into you," she said. "I have to tell you, Teresa hasn't stopped talking about the conversation you two had. She said you gave her better clarity in 2 hours than 2 years of therapy." I smiled. She did the work. I just asked some questions. That's not how she tells it. Cynthia paused, and there was something in her expression I couldn't fully categorize, an adjustment of some kind, a reassessment happening in real time. "What you're building sounds extraordinary. Franklin talks about you like you're the most interesting person he's met in 2 years. I thanked her. We talked for a few minutes. She was engaged in a way she'd never been in any conversation we'd had when I was with Valerie. Those conversations had always been slightly performative on her end, sizing me up, finding me modestly adequate. This version of Cynthia was different. I was different in her eyes. That wasn't even the strange part. The strange part happened about an hour later. I was in a cluster of 4 people that had naturally formed around a conversation about market structure and a particular set of trends that Franklin had brought up earlier. One of the 4 was a man named Spencer who I'd been introduced to by Elena and who ran a mid-market private equity firm with a focus I found genuinely interesting. We'd been going back and forth for about 15 minutes, and it had gotten to the point where the other 2 people in the cluster were mostly listening rather than contributing. Spencer said, "You should come by the office sometime. I want to think through something with you that I can't quite articulate yet." That's one of the best things someone can say. It means they trust you're thinking enough to bring you in before they've finished having the thought. "I'd like that," I said, and that was when I saw her. Valerie was about 10 feet away. She'd clearly been moving through the room towards someone and had stopped. I couldn't tell exactly when she'd stopped, but she was standing still in a way that looked like motion interrupted. She was looking at us, at Spencer and me, more specifically, at the particular quality of the conversation, the way Spencer was leaning slightly forward, the attentiveness. She knew what that looked like. She'd been in enough of these rooms to recognize the difference between polite conversation and the kind where something actual is being transacted. I didn't hold her gaze. I just noted it and returned to Spencer. Cynthia found me again near the end of the evening. She was with Teresa now, who greeted me like someone she'd been hoping to see, which I found genuinely warm rather than performative. We talked for a while, careers, the city, a project Teresa was excited about. Cynthia contributed thoughtfully. We were, for about 20 minutes, just 3 people having a good conversation at a party. Then Valerie appeared. She came over the way people approach a group they feel they belong to by proximity. She knew Cynthia, she knew Teresa, so the approach made sense. But her eyes went to me first, then to the conversation we'd been having, then to the way both Cynthia and Teresa's energy was oriented toward me. "Hey," she said. It was calibrated to sound casual. "Hey," I said. Cynthia said, warmly but without any special shift in her body language. You made it. Douglas around somewhere. He's talking to someone near the back. She gestured vaguely. What are you all discussing? Teresa's transition, Cynthia said. And some stuff about what he's building. She said it comfortably, the way you'd reference something generally understood to be interesting. Teresa jumped back into the topic she'd been excited about. Cynthia followed. I contributed. Valerie stood at the edge of the cluster. She tried twice to enter the conversation, and both times it moved past her entry point in a way that wasn't unkind, just didn't require her contribution to continue. I noticed her making small adjustments, laughing at something that wasn't quite funny enough to warrant it, referencing Douglas's name as a kind of credential, mentioning a restaurant they'd been to recently as though it established something. Neither Cynthia nor Teresa followed up on any of it. I watched this without expression. I hadn't engineered it. Hadn't wanted it exactly, but I also can't pretend I felt nothing. After maybe 15 minutes, she excused herself to find Douglas. Cynthia watched her go and then said, to no one in particular, she doesn't really get what we're talking about. She didn't say it cruelly, just as an observation, the way you'd note that someone had arrived at the wrong event. Teresa changed the subject and we kept talking. Later, near the exit, coats being retrieved, the evening unwinding. I was saying goodbye to Franklin when I felt someone near my elbow and turned to find Valerie. Douglas was a few feet behind her, on his phone. Can I talk to you for a second? She said. We stepped slightly aside. She started with logistics. It had been a while. How was I doing? Wasn't this a strange thing, running into each other here? I let her get through all of it because I recognized the real thing building underneath. It came after a pause. You seem different, she said. Different how? I don't know. People talk about you in a certain way tonight. Everyone knows you. A beat. I didn't know that's where things were going. Neither did I, really, I said. You just keep working. She nodded slowly. There was something in her expression that I'd seen only rarely. A genuine unguardedness, the performance briefly offline. Cynthia loves you, she said. She barely said 10 words to you the entire time we were together. Things change, I said. Another pause. She was trying to find the right approach to whatever she actually wanted to say, and I could see her discarding options. I wonder sometimes, she said, if I made the right. Valerie, I said gently, not cutting her off exactly, just naming her so she'd hear me. You made the decision that made sense to you then. I don't hold that against you. But I genuinely hope you're happy, I said. That's not something I'm performing. I mean it. She looked at me for a long moment. Douglas had drifted over, phone now pocketed, the practiced confidence slightly reduced in a room where several people had talked to me before talking to him. Ready, he said to her. She looked at him, then back at me. Yeah, she said quietly. Ready. I shook Douglas's hand. He was courteous, appropriately, and they left. I stood there for a moment, coat in hand. Franklin appeared beside me and said, Spencer really wants that meeting. I'd move on it. I will, I said. We walked out into the city. I've thought about that night many times since. Not obsessively, more the way you occasionally return to a photograph because it captures something you want to have captured. What I keep coming back to isn't the moment with Cynthia or the cluster around Spencer or even the conversation near the exit. It's the 20-minute stretch where Valerie stood at the edge of a conversation that used to be her world and found she couldn't find her way into it. She had spent months searching for the kind of man other women noticed the moment he walked into a room. What she hadn't calculated was that she'd been standing next to one the whole time. And the room noticed that too, just not on her timeline. I didn't say any of that to her. It wouldn't have been kind, and it wouldn't have been necessary. Some things don't need to be said out loud to be understood completely. She understood. That was enough.